Good afternoon, everyone. It's Genni Sasnett. I was there in Alabama with about half of you a few weeks ago, and it was good to be with you. Sorry I didn't get to meet the other half of you. Hopefully I have met you one point or another when I have made a visit to Alabama, but I'm happy to be with you today and happy to be able to share on this particular topic. Actually, the heading of this could have been more expansive and could have said community-based day services, including pre-voc and community exploration as effective pathways to employment, because I think a lot of what I have to say today would really be applicable to all of those services. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, I know most of you or many of you, but for those of you who I don't know, I think I've done an introduction before, so just leave it to say that I am a consultant there in the state of Alabama, where I have been consulting for many years, and am happy to be able to do that, being a native of the state. So here we go. Let's talk about reframing community-based day services. And what I mean by that is, you know, everything, as you all are extremely well aware, is moving to the community, and there is a particular pressure currently coming from the employment first movement, which is a good thing, in which we are beginning to embrace the notion that all people who want to work can work given the appropriate support. But also from the CMS community settings ruling, which have been very clear in stating that services provided under the Medicaid waiver to folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities should be provided in circumstances and environments which are in the community, in which people are included, integrated, and have routine contact with non-disabled community members. So we're thinking about day services differently, both in terms of what's happening with employment first and in terms of what's happening with the settings ruling and the whole idea of having people more included in their communities. So, you know, one of the things that I think we're understanding better is that if we organize and structure these community-based day services or pre-voc or community employment appropriately, they are great preparation for future employment. And they also can be used as a very good companion to community integrated employment for those who may work only part-time. And we know quite a few of our folks end up working part-time at one time or another, or maybe for sustained amounts of time. And finally, this service is a great one, I have found in my experience, for supporting people who are in retirement. And let me say this about retirement, and I say this to every group I speak to: retirement is past working age. And in our culture now, past working age is well into one's 60s. So when I hear about people who are retired and they're only 35 years old, it just tells me we haven't yet figured out what to do with that person, and so we're going to prematurely retire them. But what I'm talking about today is really looking at these community-based services differently than we have traditionally looked at them when they were primarily facility-based. Now, I have a definition here, and this is not an Alabama definition, so I apologize for this, but it is one from a state where I work that I really think they have the right idea on these community-based services. And so I'm going to share this with you because I like the concepts that are contained within it. So you can see here on the screen that the way this state is defining its community-based day services as supports that are there to enable a person to enrich their life and enjoy a full range of community activities. Notice the emphasis on community, by providing opportunities for developing, enhancing, maintaining competency in personal, social, and community activities. But here's where the good part is. This particular definition goes on to say that these services include, but are not limited to, the following service options. And this is the part that I think is important. The first thing you'll see on this list, and I do believe the underline may be mine, but it is still prioritized as the first thing on the list, as career exploration including assessing of interests through volunteer experiences or situational assessments. So right off the bat, this is focusing on the ability to use this service, helping a person determine what they may be interested in terms of different kinds of work, and doing that through volunteer experiences or other situational assessments, meaning other opportunities where a person is actually engaging in an activity in the community, and that's being used for assessment purposes. But it does go on to say that that in the definition that it can also be used for integration experiences to support fuller community life, for specific skill development and training, activities of daily living and independent living skills, socialization, and support to enhance interpersonal skills, which I see as tying back to employment, since we know how important our interpersonal skills are in the workplace. And then finally, pursuit of personal interests and hobbies. Often when I talk to providers, they've got this order sort of reversed. So they're initially seeing this only as a service to help people pursue interests and hobbies, and aren't thinking of it necessarily as being able to do all of these other things. And so I'm going to encourage us to really start looking at this service as something that is very meaningful and can help us support people to learn about things, opportunities in the community that they haven't had a chance to learn about before. And knowing what we know about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and they sometimes have difficulty in learning in abstract manners, learning through such things as participating in activities in the community is the best way for folks to learn, even for you and I to learn, but especially for individuals who may have intellectual or developmental disabilities. But this definition goes on still to be specific about who the service is intended for. I'm going to stop a minute, folks. Somebody needs to mute their phone. Folks, will you all make sure your phones are muted? Thank you. Thanks. Appreciate it. So this service is intended for people who are of working age, who may be on a pathway to employment. Note also that it's a supplemental service for people who are employed part-time and need a structured and supervised program of services during the day when they're not working, which may include opportunities for socialization and peer support. And finally, as I referenced before, for people who are of retirement age who need and want to participate in structured and supervised program of services in a group setting. So again, that's not your specific definition in Alabama, but I wanted to share it with you because it does a good job of capturing all of the concepts that I hope that I can get you to embrace, and that I can communicate to you how to make those things effective, how to do those things. So using community-based day service as a pathway to employment. So what if a person comes to you and they're undecided about whether they want to work, or in fact they know they want to work but they don't have the faintest idea of what they would like to do? So what could we do next? Well, we can learn more about work through CBDS, and here's how. There are many, let me even back up and say this. This service, to be effective, community-based day services, whether we're talking day have, whether we are talking pre-vote or exploration, these services have to be provided in a reasonable staff to individual ratio in order to be effective. So, you know, I have advocated, and I believe it has been heard in the state, and others have advocated as well, to really try to get your rules and your rate structures to a place where we can serve people in the community in no more than 1 to 4 staff to individual ratios. It's very difficult to do the things I'm talking about today unless you can get those ratios down low and low enough so that you can, one, be in the community without being such a large group that calls attention to itself, two, have few enough people with the staff person, that the staff person can actually focus on the individuals and accomplish things with them. And finally, so that the staff can manage the group. In other words, if there are too many people and their support needs are too diverse, it becomes exceptionally hard when you have too many people in a group. So I'm advocating for that one staff person to no more than 4 people for our community activities. But here are some career exploration activities that one could engage in with individuals who were exploring the concept of work. One, you can actually go with a small group of people to workplaces just to visit or just to take a tour. And sometimes that may be formal and sometimes it may be informal. I think I've told folks, I live down the street from a brewery. That brewery gives routine tours, daily tours. Other businesses do the same. Or sometimes you can even go to a relatively small business that is open to the public and sit with your individuals or just walk around without having a formal tour and make observations of what kind of jobs people are doing. What are the tasks of those jobs? And what are some of those titles of those jobs? Just showing people what different kinds of work folks do and what different kinds of jobs are available in the world. You can also do what's called a job tour, which may mean going to an individual place or several places where you are actually watching people do specific jobs. So a group of people might go and actually into a business and watch people who are doing clerical work, or someone who's doing retail work, or someone who's doing shelving or warehousing. It just depends on what you're touring. You can also do job shadowing, which is a little more specific, where you might actually watch one individual doing a job over an extended period of time, or you might go to several different places watching different people do a specific job over a period of time. My favorite in terms of career exploration activities is volunteering in organizations that are connected to potential career interests. So sometimes people have no idea what their career interests may be, so we may be volunteering just to get out and have some opportunity to try different things out, to be in different kinds of work settings, just to stimulate some thought about what folks may be interested in. Is something I want to mention here, because I don't want to forget it, is that if we choose to support people to do volunteerism, it is very important that everyone read the rules under the Department of Labor, the Fair Labor Standards Act, and do not violate the law. And folks can only volunteer in not-for-profit agencies if you're truly volunteering for governmental entities and for nonprofit agencies. If you're doing an internship, that's a different thing, and there are rules that apply to that, and there can be paid or unpaid internships. But right now, I'm just talking about volunteering. You can also do situational assessment. So often when I'm working with people in the community and we are doing some volunteerism, that's a great time to do an assessment on that person relative to the skills or the tasks that they may be doing in their volunteer opportunity. It's also a time, and those of you who've been trained in customized employment will remember that we do informational interviews with employers as part of the job matching process. But it's also possible to do an informational interview with an employer at any time. And you can even take a group of people in to talk to a friendly employer with whom you've made prior arrangements to say, do you mind talking to this group of people about the kinds of jobs you have here? What kind of work do you perform? What kind of tasks are involved in those jobs? And other questions that will help the individuals learn more about what is done there. And finally, job clubs. And what job clubs take many forms, but generally what they are is a group of people who get together who have a common outcome that they're seeking, like employment, and they spend time together doing different things, maybe talking about different jobs, maybe writing resumes or practicing interview skills or a whole variety of things. But it's a group of people who have the common interest of getting work. So, oops, wrong way. So the other thing that we can do is actually building skill, and that is by actually doing things, whether that may be, for example, as we were just talking about in a volunteer site. I mean, all of us learn better by viewing and doing than we do by hearing something and then trying it later. So I'm sure every single one of you can remember an experience you have where you have someone has tried to teach you something just by showing you or just talking about it, and you couldn't do it to save your soul. But later you had an opportunity to do it. A computer is a very good example of this. You can't learn to use a computer very well without sitting in front of one. So for people that we support who do already have some difficulty in many cases with learning through abstract concepts, viewing alone is not usually helpful. Viewing and then doing it, actually trying it yourself. That's how people develop skills. You can actually either through a connection through a volunteer site or through a public class that may be held on a particular topic, get some direct employment skill development for specific occupations. And so I'll give you an example of that. When I worked in my former agency, there were a couple of individuals who were artists, and they were very interested in developing their art to a higher level so that they could begin to make a living doing that. And they were able, we supported them to take art classes at just a local place where they, it was actually operated by the city of Alexandria, Virginia, where they taught art. And so that was a skill that they were developing for the specific occupation of being a professional artist. And classes and workshops, that's the same concept. You know, there's all kinds of community classes. I have known individuals to go to cooking class, arts and crafts classes. I supported a group of seniors who were in retirement, meaning past working age, to go to a framing workshop. They were learning how to frame pictures. So there's lots of things out there that we can identify that we can actually use to build skills. But the most important ones, at least in my opinion, are the soft skills trainings in the natural environment. So, you know, you guys all on the phone, however many there are of you, and me, we all learned how to behave in the workplace by being in natural environments, by going to school, by going to Sunday school, you know, by being in clubs or groups. You know, we learn those skills not so much by direct training, but more we pick them up in the natural environment. That's true for people with disabilities too, and often they haven't had as much opportunity to be in natural environments where they could observe these skills being used. And so, for example, if I was trying to teach somebody about dressing appropriately for work, I could show them a video. We could have a classroom discussion about it, but I'm going to be able to teach them that concept much more quickly in the community where I can actually point out role models. Here's this guy walking down the street. Is he dressed appropriately for work? Yes or no? Here's this woman. Is she dressed appropriately? Yes or no? That kind of stuff can be done particularly when you are in volunteer situations, but it can be done all of the time that you're in the community as long as we train our staff to know how to do that. I think the other thing that we often do a poor job of that can be addressed through activities in the community, particularly things like volunteerism, is the concept of making commitments. Often we are not good at teaching the people we support about the importance of making commitments. And there is probably nothing more important in the work world than your ability to make a commitment. Because when you get a job, you're saying you're going to come every day, you're going to be on time, you're going to do your work, and a whole variety of other commitments. But we haven't always done a terrific job, as I was just saying, of teaching people with disabilities that these concepts. Where I remember it most strikingly in my own experience is when I worked in a shelter workshop And there was a lot of different behavior that was tolerated there that probably didn't teach people the right things about work. And what I mean by that is, people could come late, leave early, refuse to work that day, and there were never any consequences to those things. So we weren't doing a good job of teaching about commitment. When I do community-based day services, I do it in a very structured way and train the staff to understand that they have to make it as similar to work as possible, not meaning as a substitute for work, but so that you're teaching the right concepts that are indeed going to be the ones that are going to help people when they get the opportunity to be in a job. And part of that making commitments is understanding natural consequences. So, if I didn't come to work and I didn't call in at least a couple of days in a row, I'd lose my job. So we have to help people understand that there's commitments you make, there's consequences that occur when you don't live up to those commitments. So this is soft skills. I was just talking to you about this, so I won't belabor this other than to say that some of what we need to be teaching is travel training. And I know that not everybody is in a location in which there's public transportation and travel training can be taught. But we're all branching out and doing all kinds of interesting stuff for travel now, like using Uber and Lyft and doing some travel, some sharing of transportation with coworkers and all sorts of stuff. So I think there's a lot to teach people about traveling in the community, whether that's via public transportation or other modes, and something that we should always be teaching. So that's something to keep in mind as people are moving around the community. What can we teach about safe crossing of streets? What can we teach about just safe travel in the community in general? And be sure that we are doing that. We can also teach, as I said before, the soft skills things, how to manage your time, how to schedule your work. Those kinds of things can be addressed as well. Oops, I keep going the wrong way. But one of the most important things, and you'll see this in the settings rule, because I think that that's what it's trying to get at when it's putting such a heavy emphasis on having people in situations where they're continuously able to interact with non-disabled peers, is that, relationships are very important to all of us. I mean, they are really one of the defining things about satisfaction with your life. People who have friends and relationships are more satisfied with life. And none of us really want to be in the position that many of the people we support are in, and that is being dependent on only people who are paid to be with you, and not having relationships that are outside of that paid relationship. So we develop relationships with people not just at the drop of a hat, but we develop relationships with people when we see them routinely. So if we begin to interpret these community-based services as a whole series of one-time visits to places, or to places that we go very infrequently, or when we're there, there's no ability to interact with others, we're sort of inhibiting the possibility of developing relationships. Relationships develop when you see someone frequently and there's something that you have in common, even when that something is as minor, say, as going to the same coffee shop in the morning routinely. After a while, you see those people over and over, and they become interested in you, and you become interested in them, and that's how we develop relationships. I tell a story about my friend John in Virginia who loved coffee, and so he was an older man, and he and his fellows went to the coffee shop every morning, and it just got to where when he walked in the door, everybody would holler out his name and just be so glad to see him and worry about him on days that he didn't come. And eventually, he was older and he did pass away, and they closed the coffee shop and everybody came to his funeral. Now that meant so much to me because it said that indeed he had found an informal community group who loved him and who cared and wanted to see and honor him upon his death. That's what we're looking for, that kind of life
with that kind of relationship that we can count on. So how to get started in all this? I imagine you're all straddling it somewhere, doing some things, and some are far down the road and some are not so far down the road. But here's some things to think about in getting started. Because even if you're started, you can always improve. It's really important for everyone involved to understand how this service is going to be used. And that means the people served, the support coordinator, who, by the way, you will often be educating yourself, the family, and more than anyone, the staff providing the service. You want to make sure that people understand that this is a service that will be provided in the community, that we are hopeful that we will be able to use this service to get people to understand more about options in their community for work, for recreating. It will help people develop interests. It will help people develop important relationships. But to be clear, that is our intent. We will be in the community in a structured way. And I'm going to talk to you more about structure because I'm very passionate about that. But in a structured way, so that we are very consciously and carefully doing what we're doing and very intentionally doing it. Now, I'm going to talk about community mapping in a second, but that's absolutely imperative. It is the process for identifying the activities, and I will tell you, the more activities, more volunteer sites, the more things you have for people to be involved in, the easier this is. If you don't have many, then it's going to be difficult, and I will just assure you that right off the bat. But again, we'll talk a little more in a second about that. It's also very critical to get the staff prepared. And, you know, I think I'm doing a training in a couple of months specifically on staff in our work in general, and I will talk very explicitly and in detail then, but I will say these things to you now, that it's very important. Yes, did I hear someone? Okay. It's very important to identify the competencies that the staff need to be successful. And what I mean by that is the things that people were required to do in their jobs in the facility may indeed not be the same things that they're going to be required to do in the community. So we need to figure out what those things are. And one example of that may be interacting with the public, you know, speaking to the public on behalf of the agency, being able to negotiate something with a community member. There's a lot of different things that they will be called upon that you need to identify as you are looking for staff to do this work. And also as you are retraining your current staff, which they must be retrained. It's not fair to try to just move current staff over with no training for what the difference is going to be in the work. So in addition to identifying the competencies people need, we also need to identify the qualities and characteristics in the staff. And again, I'll speak extensively in the future about this, but by that I mean things like being self-directed, being motivated, having a high personal work standard or work ethic, ability to respond in an emergency in a calm manner. Those are different. Those are qualities and characteristics are different than competencies. Competencies are skills. I can teach you a skill pretty quickly. A quality or a characteristic, things like being a self-starter, being a person with a high work ethic, those are things people generally come with. Either you have acquired those qualities and characteristics as you've been maturing, or you haven't, but they are very difficult to teach. So we have to have ways of pulling out from people, do they have those qualities and characteristics. We need job descriptions that are reflective of both things, of the competencies that we want folks to have, but also the qualities and characteristics that we hope that they will have. And we're going to use that job description, to train that staff. So it's going to be important that job description is very well done. We also need to have recruitment strategies that are going to attract those kinds of staff. And again, in my future presentation, I will give you much more detail on this, but be thinking about what your ads currently say and what you may want them to say in the future. If they have historically, as mine did, primarily started talking about disability from the beginning of the ad, you might want to think about this. Switching the ad to where it's hitting on some of the qualities and characteristics you want in the person first. So it might say something like, are you a motivated self-starter who loves to meet new people and blah, blah, blah. You're hitting on those qualities and characteristics that you hope that staff will be attracted to and they will call in. You're not failing to mention disability in that ad. It's just not the first thing you're saying. And I will tell you from my experience, it's easier to teach someone to work with an individual with disability than to teach them to have the qualities and characteristics that you desire. And so, as I said earlier, you have to give some consideration also to retraining your existing staff. I feel very badly when I see existing staff moved into the field without any retraining and any acknowledgement that, in fact, their job has changed, their job description has changed, their responsibilities have changed, and we need to make sure that we're acknowledging that and giving them what they need so they can do their job well. So we need that retraining. We need new orientation and training for the new staff. And what I have also found helpful is to develop a mentor-mentee relationship between tenured staff and new staff. So sometimes it's helpful to pair a new staff with a tenured person while they are in their orientation period so they can get some extra support from them. So just a few words about what we want to make sure that we hit in the staff orientation and training. What's going to be very important is to talk about philosophy, because if you don't embrace the concept, then you can't do the job, period. So if you don't believe that people with disabilities should be in the community, that they should be included, that they should have opportunities to develop the relationships like I'm talking about, and that ultimately we have a goal for community integrated employment for folks, then it's going to be hard for you to do this job as a staff person. So we need to start talking as we're training the new staff from the get-go about the philosophy of employment first and about our intention of supporting people to be more included and integrated in their communities. If people don't believe that's what should happen, this is probably not the job for them. So, I also like to talk to staff, and again, I will speak to you more extensively about this in the future presentation, but I believe the staff are who really ends up changing society's perception of people with disabilities. And what I mean by that is someone like me is not actually going to have an impact probably directly on how people see people with disabilities. But a great staff person that is out in the community with someone and can help and can have it in them to step back and let that person shine and show them in a situation where they're being very competent and the rest of the world around that person observes that begins to change how people see people with disabilities. So that staff person is the change agent. They're really the one with the power in their hands to change how society sees people with disabilities. And indeed, that really is our ultimate goal, is to have that impact. So we need to have staff understand that role and the importance of it. Obviously, we need to train them on the how-tos, meaning the nuts and bolts. And you can do things like create program manuals. I did that. There are policies that they need to understand about, procedures they need to be briefed on. And as I was saying earlier, if you can do some field-based training with a mentor-mentee kind of relationship developing, that's very powerful, because that means someone who already knows how to do the job is teaching a new person how to do it. one thing that I get excited about the more I think about it, because I think there's so much power in this, and we can do better if we just help people see how to do better. And that's focusing on teaching in natural environments. So what we don't generally do as good a job of as we could is training the staff to see teachable moments. And what I mean about that is this: if I had someone with me in the community and I was about to cross the street, and that person didn't have in their ISP anything about safe street crossing, that is still a teachable moment. And that's going to do nothing but good for that person. So I need to spot those moments and use them, particularly when they're in the community, because they're going to be so powerful in helping that person acquire that skill. And then finally, I would just say that on staff evaluations, and again, I will talk more about this in the human resources session, focusing the evaluation of staff on their ability to demonstrate the competencies that you need them to have, the ones that you have taught during training, is a great way to do an evaluation and take the emotion out of it, because you're still looking at the performance of the staff, but you're looking at it from the perspective of, I gave a training on this, or we provided training on this. This is something this person should be able to do. I'm going to go make an observation. I'm going to see, can they do it? If they can, great, the training worked. If they can't, well, something about the training was ineffective, so I need to talk to this person and find another approach. It's, again, just putting the weight on the training. Now, of course, if you have somebody who you retrain and it's ineffective, you may be into a performance issue, but that's a horse of a different color. So here we go. All right. So you got to have some place to collect information in our field as you are moving towards employment, or even if you're trying to develop a healthy schedule for community involvement. I have chosen in my work to use something that's called a positive personal profile. That's a tool that's used in customized employment. So those of you on the phone who've been through the customized employment, the Mark's Goals School, the Michael Callahan School, you've had similar training to what I've had. You just may have used a different form here. The same is true for those who have been through the Griffin Hamas customized employment training. This form that I use comes from Transcend. There are just 3 different schools of the same kind of training, so that's all around customized employment. So I'm going to show you the actual tool in a second, but the way I use this tool, and it's a document to collect information, was when I would first encounter a person and I was going to be doing community-based services with them, and I needed a starting place. I needed to know enough information to put together a very preliminary schedule for that person, where we could get out in the community and get a better idea of what their interests were, so we could do a stronger, longer, more individualized schedule. So that was one way I used it. But it was also a document that I kept alive over time, that would capture information from people's experiences in Pre-Voc or community-based day or community exploration, but ultimately then could go over to employment and be used for discovery. Discovery is a one-on-one process, whereas these others that I'm describing tend to be more one person, one staff to multiple people. So this is the information you could collect is sort of foundational. The discovery information will be much more in-depth. But it's also a way to capture information about what a person might want to do if they're working part-time and need a wraparound service, or if they are truly of retirement age and are ready to retire. So this just sort of reiterates what I said. This is a tool to record information from discovery, but I myself have adapted it also to use for community-based day services. And here's the list of some things that it can help you look at. And this information can be used for a variety of things, including creating job search plans. And also you can take for them to do resumes or help a person prepare for an interview. But here's what it looks like. So this one is called a Positive Personal Profile. I think they're called something similar in the other schools of customized employment. But if you can look at this and see what I was saying before, when I'm just meeting somebody for the first time and I'm getting ready to help them become involved in their community, I may just do an interview with this person, or if they don't speak for themselves, someone who knows them well, knowing I'm just going to get a little bit of information here. I'm probably not going to get a whole lot of info, but it's going to give me enough, as I said before, to do like that preliminary schedule. But over time, as people are getting involved in the community and doing such things as volunteerism, I'm going to be able to expand this document with the information that we're going to collect while folks are involved in the community. And I'm going to tell you how we're going to do that. Here actually is a positive personal profile that's more fully filled out. Excuse me. If you were looking at, say, the second box here on the left that says talent, skills, and knowledge, look at all the things that we have learned about this person that would help in determining what a good job match for that person may be. And if you look down at the fourth box for environmental preferences, you may also see where there are certain environments that are going to support this person well, and some that are not going to, support them very well at all. So that's the kind of information ultimately we're trying to collect. Now, I said I'd come back to community mapping, so here we are back at community mapping. So what community mapping is doing is, this is, as I said before, the identification of the things that you want to become involved in your community, day services or pre-voc or community exploration. You have to know these things in advance. You have to have a catalog of these things. And what's important to know is that they're not all just listed, say, on a community website of volunteer opportunities, or on a community website of community, events or activities. They're found in a whole variety of ways. And what you're looking for is opportunities for community involvement. So that could be all the way from, taking a class, or, attending a rally, about in honor of veterans, or, something that's going to get you involved with the community. Membership, formal and informal. The story I just told you of John in the coffee shop, that's informal membership. But sometimes there's formal membership, like belonging to the Toastmasters or some kind of informal club or group. Volunteering, as I have mentioned numerous times, and I'm a big advocate of using volunteering as training and assessment. Also learning by doing, or learning through instruction. So that may be taking a class, or it may be just setting up a situation. It could be even in the volunteering that you are learning by doing something. Exploring and pursuing specific interests and meeting like-minded people. And the like-minded people goes back to the relationship development and the importance of, to all of us, to have people in the community who care about us and with whom we have a reciprocal relationship of caring. So we're not looking for opportunities that are for people with disabilities. We know how to do that. What we're looking for is opportunities to be with non-disabled peers. And as I said earlier, we're not looking for a series of one-time events. So be very thoughtful and cautious about too much focus on one-time events. Now, having said that, let me say this. In my agency, we had very stable schedules of volunteerism. So if somebody was committing to volunteer, they were committing to go usually several days a week and for a long duration of time. However, woven into the schedule, there were other cultural activities. So there might be some one-time events, like say there's a concert or there's a parade or some other thing that occurs. in a community. That should be woven in, but the majority of what you're doing should be more routine. So quickly, I just want to show you this, and you will initially maybe not appreciate this, but I believe you will come to appreciate it over time. Ideally, you would have a searchable database where you could enter this information, but if that's not the case, and it isn't for many of us, then this can always be started on the spreadsheet. But if you're doing community scheduling for a lot of people, then it's going to be challenging to do that if you have a lot of different groups going out at the same time. In my agency, where we were 100% facility-based, everybody was in the community all of the time, so everybody was on a schedule all of the time. And it was critically important that we have a multitude of things for folks to do for all the reasons I've spoken to earlier. But if you look at this form, you can see it has, things across the top that are obvious: the name, the address, the contact, the type of activity, exactly what you're doing there, which days and hours it's available, whether there's fees, whether there's a lunch area or not, whether the person is on public transportation, and how many people maximum could be present. And I have two examples here: the American Heart Association and the ASPCA. So if you just think about it, if you were doing a lot of scheduling and you had 20 or 30 of these locations, how much easier it would be to do multiple schedules and to do them allowing people to do things they're interested in, because you have so much diversity. But as I was saying earlier, you can't just count on going to a website or something to get these. I always recommend asking staff, what are you aware of in the community, asking families, asking board members, and even with regard to staff, doing things like giving prizes or rewards to people who come up with things, because often things are not advertised. So there may be an activity at a local church. I know some folks who used to go to a gospel sing, and that was at a local church, not advertised anywhere, but this was for a retired group, and they really liked going to that. Somebody had to know about that and share it, because, as I said, otherwise it was not publicly known. So when you're doing activity development for CBDS, as I've mentioned many of these things before, and so I won't reiterate them, but I will go sort of mid-page to the bullet that says doing things routinely to learn commitment and gain a feel for a task or a job. As I said before, I think we've done a poor job in many cases of teaching people about commitment, and that's just been inadvertent. We didn't mean to do that. But we do need to have people understand, if you are volunteering to go to the American Heart Association 3 days a week, then that is a commitment that you're expected to live up to. In my organization, we actually had 3-month schedules. So if I committed to go to the Heart Association, the ASPCA, and a couple of other places, I went to those for 3 months before my schedule changed. As I said before, there were other things woven in there that changed much more frequently, but the thought was I needed to go to those places for a while, because there were a multitude of tasks at all the places that I could try. I could learn whether I liked those things or not. Staff could learn about me and what skills I had and what environments I enjoyed. And I would have that opportunity to learn about workplace expectations and to develop appropriate workplace behavior, and do this through seeing positive role models in the workplace. Again, it's an opportunity for me to develop relationships, because often our work relationships are close ones. And again, the soft skills development. So I'm going to show you quickly a sample schedule for what I would call the pathway to employment. And so this one, let me say this. In my organization, we were in urban, suburban, and rural settings. So we did things differently according to whatever that setting was. In urban settings, we could use public transportation because there was lots of it. Suburban, less so, because public transportation is often there, but it's morning and evening for commuters, not so much during the day. And then in our rural areas, we tend to have no public transportation whatsoever, and then we have to use vehicles, our company's vehicles. But this one is predicated on an urban setting. In those urban settings, what would happen is my staff would have a prescribed meetup and drop-off location. And in this case, this actually was at Union Station, which is a big train station downtown or on Capitol Hill in D.C., which has a mall in it. Also has a subway stop and bus stops. So the staff would be there in the morning. Individuals would arrive there through various means. So the schedule clearly instructs the staff for what to do, because they know they're going to see 4 people and they're not all going to come at the same minute. So you're going to have probably about a 15-minute period that people are arriving. So the staff is being instructed through the information in the parentheses of things that they should be doing with those individuals while they're waiting for everyone to collect. You'll then see that the next item is how to travel to the next activities. In this case, because it's in a city, it's giving a bus number and is being very specific on how to get to the location. But note also in the parentheses here that it is focusing the staff on what they should be thinking about, what teachable moments may come up during that travel period, things that they need to focus on. Then below that, you see that there's the volunteer time. And again, there's instructions to the staff for what to be focusing on beyond simply the tasks that are at hand. And then next, it talks about where lunch will be had, because that tends to be something that needs to be determined. Because my agency had no facilities, there was no going back in the middle of the day for lunch. And I am an advocate for that practice, just because it doesn't then break your day up and cause you to constantly be going back and forth and spending so much time in travel, and allowing you to have more focused times for instruction, and also to be in settings having lunch with others, where again you see the role modeling and you have the chance for relationship development. So this next one is actually a schedule that was designed for someone who was, or for some people, some of them were working part-time and coming in and out of the schedule. And I wanted to show you this because this is where life gets especially complicated for scheduling. And I always used to say I thought we needed an air traffic controller to do some of these arrangements. So just scanning through this, what you'll see is looking at the far left hand, folks meeting up, they're going to the art museum. One person is then, leaving with the job coach, going to work. Then people are doing another activity, and then at 1 o'clock, look, someone is joining them. Then that person is coming in because they were working in the morning, and then everyone is going to the food bank subsequently. You will see, because I put it in bold print throughout this schedule, where people are coming in and out. Again, can get quite complicated, but because this service is good for a variety of things, it's entirely possible to have people moving in and out of the schedule, and so you have to be prepared for that. And let me say a couple of things about that. First of all, these schedules have to be ironclad for the reason that people may be coming in and out. So they have to be, this group has to be where it says it's going to be. Also, if somebody was coming late, we didn't wait for them. We carried on the schedule, and it was made very clear to whoever was transporting the individual, they needed to look at the schedule and they needed to come find us and deliver that person to where we were. If you start getting into the game of waiting for the other person, then you're not going to be very happy. It's not going to go well. It's establishing our place is in the community. Here's our schedule. We're going to be following this. This is where we're going to be. And management needs to know that too. Management needs to know where you are every single solitary second. And so I'm passionate about that too. people get confused about this service and think it's just random and people just deciding on off the cuff where they're going to go one day or changing that midstream or whatever. That should not be the case. We're responsible to make sure that people are getting the programming that we're being paid to provide for them, and that we are responsible for where they are and what they're doing and their safety and security. So these schedules are no joke. They have to be followed. Now, if you could scan further down on these, and I'm sorry I didn't include it, you would notice I had an alternative activities. So if somebody went to, say, the American Heart Association or the ASPCA, and for whatever reason they couldn't be there that day, a water main broke or a bomb scare happened or whatever, the staff knew to go to that alternative activity and to immediately text or phone the supervisor and to say, we're on Plan B today, which would then allow further communication of that to other people who need to know that. But it's, I think people are sometimes a little too casual about where people are and what they're doing, and you really should not do that. I like these really specific schedules. Now remember, the people are making choices, so let's be clear about that. In the beginning, people are telling us what they're interested in. As we're putting the schedules together, people are being clear about the things they want to do and the choices that they're making. But making choices and making commitments are not contrary things. Those two things can go together. So, as I said before, it's important that staff understand what we're trying to accomplish. And one of the critical things we need to do is do a better job of collecting data. And so I created this form, it's not really a form yet, it's just a Word document, but I'm going to run through it quickly with you here. I have one that's filled out. It's probably easier to look at. So I just use my information here. So if you look at the top line, it has my name, the date, what I'm doing. I'm volunteering at the Red Cross, who's my staff, and the ratio of staff to individuals, because there could be some importance to that. The next item you see is the environmental reaction. So because we know a lot of people who can do well in a certain environment and then do horribly in other environments, we need to know as much as we humanly can about what the best environments are for people. Because if I'm looking at this ultimately as something for job development, that's a critical piece of information. Looking down at the next item, activity, volunteering, American Red Cross, we need to know if that person prefers that. It may be that they can do all the activities, all the tasks there, but they don't like it. It's, I can do a lot of things that I don't prefer to do. So we need to know what people prefer. Then if you look below that and you look at task 1, what we do a poor job of sometimes is collecting information on the skills that people currently have. So if I was going with someone to American Red Cross and they could already do these things, that would be important to note. And if you look at the center column, it's just asking me if, though the person can do these, whether this is preferred or not, that too is important to know. As I said, we can do a lot of things, we don't prefer all of them. Below that, if you look at the next set of things, the skills that are emerging, very important, because maybe there's something I can't quite yet do, but you could see that I should be able to learn that. That would be where I would place my training focus. That person almost has this, so let's be focusing on teaching that. And to the far right in the comment section, there's an opportunity to comment on what may or may not be going on with that person's ability to learn this particular task. And then finally at the bottom, support required. This is something that seems to be perhaps some persistent work performance issues. And again, you would want to comment on that, and then also make sure that that's available to others who might be going with this person other times to this location. So I wouldn't collect this data every time I went, but I would have some kind of routine schedule upon which to collect it. And by the way, when you have people in the community, particularly when they are in volunteerism, that's a great opportunity to collect pictures. Everybody's got a phone. We've all got a camera. collect pictures that can be later used for visual resumes, and I can talk about them on another day as well. Be sure that you're capturing the people working with their coworkers, not their peers, not their disabled peers, but their coworkers or co-volunteers. Preferably not with the staff in the picture, because what you want is an image of that person successfully performing a task in what is obviously a workplace. And when you have people in those kinds of settings, it's also a good opportunity to prepare people for working interviews. So many times our folks don't interview well. However, if we can arrange for a working interview, they show very well. So sometimes when I would have somebody doing something at a volunteer site, I might say to them, well, let's pretend we're doing a working interview and let's go through what that would be like. So that would be a great opportunity to do that. So I just got a couple more. I know we're at 3, but I just got a couple more concepts. So hang with me just a couple more minutes, and then I'll see if you have any questions. So having all that data I was just talking about is great, but not if you don't use it. So going back to that positive personal profile, remembering that tool I showed you earlier, what makes sense to me is having some kind of routine schedule for collecting data, as I said before, and then determining how is that data going to be transmitted, and to whom is it going to be transmitted, and how is it going to be stored. Because we lose a lot of that kind of information, and it's sad to me that we do, because it causes us to put people through retraining and retesting that's not necessary. But what I did in my agency is, because there was a person who was already doing quarterly reports, and that meant they were already looking through the data of certain people, we assigned them to also look at this data I just showed you that would be collected at a volunteer site, and to update the positive personal profile with that data as they were also doing the quarterly report. So I was trying to streamline, trying to already think of what staff person already has the responsibility of doing updates. Is it possible that that person then could look at this little extra set of data and update the profile so that only one person is in that profile and it's staying nice and clean and well done and professional looking? So the final thing I'm going to mention is this, that if you do not have some kind of internal mechanism for prioritization of who's next up for employment, then we risk losing people or having them languish in day programs when that's not really what they should be doing. You know, if you believe, as I do, that all people can work with the right supports, then theoretically everybody you're supporting, you know, should be in the pipeline. But you can't, you know, get 100 people a job at once, or even 20 people a job at once. So internally, it's important to have some kind of mechanism so that as these people are doing things in the community, as we're recording that information, as we are updating these profiles, that a group comes together on some kind of routine basis that has representatives from the day program, pre-vote, community exploration, your employment services, whomever else you decide is important, but are making sure that they're identifying the people who are most urgent to be next up for employment. And then those people then can go through the proper channels to pursue that employment. I have a couple of things here that sort of apply to you. If there's some variation, it'll be minor. But generally how we get folks into employment, particularly when we're using VR, if they're identified, they're referred, they're made eligible, they're referred back to us, we get them into assessment, discovery hopefully, then we have job development, stabilization, and long-term supports are put in place. And sometimes those long-term supports are job coaching, and sometimes they can be job coaching and some other kind of community-based day service or community-based support. When somebody's not going through VR, it's a very similar kind of process. You're just skipping that. In your state, you have a requirement to have a rejection from VR. And I know there's been some complications with that that we've discussed before. I discussed with some of the folks I have been with. But if that's not there and it's established they're not going to serve the person, then you can just go straight to the waiver. But when CBS and employment service work together, this is what it looks like. Somebody might come into community-based day support. They may have some experiences in the community, and we record that information. Then we identify them as being critical for employment. They then may get referred to VR or the employment department, depending on whether they're going to go through VR or not. Then we begin the discovery. And in this case, because they've been in CBDS, we have a foundation upon which to build that discovery, because we have collected a lot of information while they're in CBDS. And then we begin discovery and begin the wraparound support if that is deemed appropriate. So I'm just a little over, but in summary, we are striving very hard to achieve community integrated employment. That is the ultimate goal. But CBDS or Prevoke or community experience can be a great pathway to community integrated employment if we use them effectively. And documentation and communication are very important to keep us from siloing our services or getting people stuck for 1,000 years in the training mode. And finally, it takes the whole team working together to make the dream of working and living fully integrated into the community a reality. So I will stop there. And Byron, I don't know if we have time for questions. Byron?
Hello, I'm here. Sorry, I had you on mute.
That's okay. I didn't know if I'm a little over. I didn't know if there was time for questions.
We can see if there's one or two.
Okay.
Burning questions.
Okay.
Doesn't appear there are any burning questions today.
No burning questions today. Okay. Well, in that
Hey,
case,
Genni. Hey, Genni,
You have
this is Becky from Eagles Link. I just want to thank you for what you did for us. And the resources have been incredible. And just that day you spent with us, what a difference it's going to make.
well, great. Well, I'm glad to hear that, Becky, and I hope you're walking on the beach now.
Well, I am. I walked for 2 hours. I think I've got about 6 miles in.
Well, good for you. Well, thank